I'm joined by Bill O'Brien, one of the co-founders of the Truth and Neutrality Alliance in Ireland. This is an organisation that has been set up to promote Irish neutrality principally, but also to promote a more fair and balanced debate on what was the causes of the war in Ukraine, how the war is going, and what could bring about an end to the war in Ukraine as well. Bill was also one of the organisers of a demonstration recently at the British Embassy against the escalation of the war on the part of the British government through armaments, but also through rhetoric as well. Bill, thanks for joining me today.
Okay, thank you for having me.
No problem, Bill. Before we talk about the Truth and Neutrality Alliance itself, how do you think the demonstration went at the British Embassy a couple of weeks ago?
I think it went very, very well, and I think it broke a lot of ice. And a lot of people who remained silent over the whole thing came out. And I've seen in papers, and especially in road papers, people expressing themselves for the first time. It also helped the migrant community, both Russian and Ukrainian, to be able to speak freely about what's happening. And we're very pleased with that. We got a lot of international press because it was outside the British Embassy, and mostly on social media and things like that, but also in Russian newspapers. They wanted to know why we picked the Russian Embassy or the British Embassy. And we said that we felt that Boris Johnson was the fly in the ointment when it came to not honouring the Minsk Accord, and that he hardened the line every chance he got. And he even went, anytime he felt that the Ukrainians were ready for the peace negotiations, he went to Ukraine himself and spoke to Zelensky and made sure that that didn't happen.
Okay, so there's also the issue of the continued arming of Ukraine, and this rhetoric, whether it's coming from Johnson, whether it's coming from Rishi Sunak or anyone else, is this just this constant rhetoric of escalation and this idea that Ukraine will fight to the last person in Ukraine, which is, to my mind anyway, just a horrific concept. You guys have formed an alliance of different groups and individuals and have called it the Truth and Neutrality Alliance. Can you give me a little bit of background on, because although it's only a few words, Truth and Neutrality Alliance, there's a lot in that and there's a lot to unpack in that, especially in these times. Could you give us a little bit of a background on the Truth and Neutrality Alliance?
Well, why we emphasize the truth is because the amount of censorship, both official and unofficial, that there is in regards to this war is enormous. You cannot get the two sides at all. Russia Today is banned. Russian television is banned. There's nothing that tells us the other side at all. And it's all very, very pro-West and pro-NATO. And that did happen during the Cold War here at the very beginning, the 50s and 60s. You wasn't allowed to open your mouth. There was so-called Iron Curtain. And it seems to me that they put up an Iron Curtain again, because we are not allowed to interview people in Russia or in the occupied or the Russian speaking areas of Ukraine. And that's why we have to get the truth out. We're supposed to be a neutral country. And neutrality means that you don't take sides, that you listen to the two sides. We are not being able to listen to the two sides. And that's critically important for peace, so that we get a balanced view. Ireland should be looking for peace. But instead of that, it seems to me that the government here want to slowly but surely get us into NATO, blacken the Russians completely, and make them the devil incarnate. And then we, as a nice, peaceful country, should jump in on the side of NATO. The truth comes out very, very seldom. Now, I think that the truth came out 2 weeks ago about the Minsk agreement, when Angela Merkel said that they never had any intention of honouring it. They only were buying time so they could build up an army. And that's what the Russians said all along. And now she's after confirming that. Also, about the pipeline, that's an enormous thing. How did NATO blow up that pipeline? And for what reason? And It was to stop Germany from getting gas from Russia, because they might have to lift the sanctions if they got the gas.
So these are the kind of truths that your alliance is saying we're not allowed to speak, or at least you and I might be able to speak it on fringe social media, but you won't hear it on the likes of the public broadcaster and things like that. And on the rare occasion that you do hear something like that, it's jumped upon and put down and suffocated straight away. So I fully agree with you in those terms, but there's even a suppression not only of Russian media itself, but some people might say it's propaganda, though I have found it to be more consistent and validatable than the stuff that's coming out in Western media. But there's also a suppression, isn't there, of discussion at all within the Irish media context that you just don't hear. Like normally you would hear a discussion where somebody from the left comes in, someone well known from the left, and it's natural for the left to take an anti-war position, a neutrality position. But we're just, apart from Claire Daly and Mick Wallace in the European Parliament, you were just not hearing it at all in our own houses of the Oireachtas of the Irish Parliaments. And so we're starting from a very low base, and you're starting from a very low base in terms of calling for truth.
Absolutely. And I mean, Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, they get more publicity in the Russian press than they do in the Irish press. And when they get any publicity in the Irish press, they're called Putin puppets and all kinds of names like that. Now, Claire Daly condemns Russia out of hand every chance she gets, but I think she's wrong. I don't regard it as an invasion, I regard it as an intervention. Because when you study the truth behind the whole thing, you will find that, and especially after what Angela Merkel said, that they were building up an army. And what were they building up the army for? To go into Donbass and to go into the other Russian-speaking parts. And they had already killed 14,000 people in 8 years. And they were going to have a whole-scale war. They were going to have a genocidal war against Russian-speaking people.
There does seem to be, even when people do get a chance to speak a little bit of truth, there does appear to be almost a compulsion to apologize initially before
Yes.
you do tell that truth. Just moving on to the subject of, I know from discussions before recording the program that with you before recording the program that you have contacts with both Russians and Ukrainian refugees and Ukrainians who have lived in Ireland before this conflict, but also Ukrainian refugees. You have extensive contact with them here in Ireland. What do you think they're feeling about the war, about the context and the media coverage of the war, about the whole thing? How do you feel they feel?
Well, we actually had them at the demonstration. I think I introduced you to some of them. And but first of all, the Russians are afraid to open their mouths because they're strangers in this land, and they know there's an anti-Russian feeling there after being built up with all this false information that's been given out by the media. We have contact with the refugee community. Now, I think there's 65,000 refugees in Ireland at the moment. Now, we would divide them up into 3 different categories. First of all, there's those who support Zelensky. And then there's those who don't, who support the Russians. And then there's those in the middle who are the majority and the vast majority that just want to get away from the conflict or war and live and let their children live. And they tend to stay silent in Ireland because if they were to express an opinion, they'd be fighting among themselves. And they don't even talk about it. I know some of them, they come to talk to me because they can't talk to other Ukrainians. They're afraid. Well, they're afraid that first of all, if they expressed pro-Russian sentiment, that it could go back to Ukraine. And Zelensky is running a secret service there, and they're afraid that their parents or their grandparents, because it was most of the refugees here are younger people. The older people stayed because they feel their lives are pretty much over. Anyway, they're old. but get the children out and get yourselves out and survive this war. What people don't realise in Ireland is that there's a civil war going on in Ukraine as well as a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And the civil war is similar to the civil war we had here. Now, the last time there was a democratic election, I think it was 2013, and the whole of the Ukraine voted. The main issue was, do we join the EU or do we join Russia? And the Russian bloc won up by 52% to 48%. Now, that could you could divide that up geographically as well. The people in the western region of Ukraine voted to join the EU. The people on the western side voted to join the Russian Federation. Now, that was a very divisive vote because 52 and 48 isn't really a decisive victory for either side or failure for either side. So much so that NATO organised and engineered a coup d'etat. And that's when the two provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk succeeded away from the Ukraine. Now, for 8 years after that, there was continuous bombardment of those two provinces by the Ukrainian forces. And then when they had the Minsk agreement, which was signed twice, and was supposed to be guaranteed by Germany and by France, they thought that was it, the war was over, because they agreed for them to get a certain amount of autonomy. But they didn't want the separation from the rest of Ukraine. They still wanted to be part of Ukraine, but they wanted guarantees for their language, their culture, and things like that. And NATO said, no, as soon as we have our army, we're going in for you. And that's what they done. They sent in. And it was at that stage that the Russian intervention took place. It was in February of last year. The Russian intervention took place.
So when we look at the Ukrainian refugees that are here, which you said earlier, we have those that would support Zelensky, those that would be considered themselves Russian, and you have those that, like, I've met one guy, a Ukrainian guy, who considers himself to be Ukraine-Russian and doesn't support the Putin intervention. There's such a mix, so we can't presume. You know, I've come across some angst in certain quarters over the last year with Ukrainian refugees coming in general, but also some people who were concerned that they would be very pro-Zelensky and would take a very NATO, with some people were saying, let's say, a fascist approach to things. But I think there's such a varied political sphere or political panorama out there that we can't presume anything about any groups. But I would presume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're all horrified just by the war and the destruction and what's happening.
Absolutely. There's going to be no winners in this war. And look, it's a civil war. And civil wars, as we know ourselves, are worse than wars between nations. And civil wars, it divides families, it divides friends, it divides neighborhoods. And it takes centuries, decades and decades for to overcome that. And even in the middle of the civil war, people can change sides because things can happen. On one occasion they're supporting this side, and the next occasion they're supporting the other side. Now, we know all that from our own civil war. Like, we had a war of independence, and then we had a civil war for 18 months after that. And more people were killed in the civil war than were killed in the war of independence. So there's a civil war going on as well as a proxy war. And it's a terrible tragedy. These people stay silent. They will not express themselves. They're not, as far as they're concerned, they're guests in this country, and they're not going to do anything that will seem to be upsetting the apple cart. Like, if they supported Russia, they'd be afraid they'd be thrown out of the hostels, and the government here wouldn't support them anymore. And that's the danger they have as well. You know, when you talk to them, I met a man, and he was walking around the village I live in, and he looked extremely forlorn. and we were talking, and he had some English and he had some German and I had some German. And between the two, we got an intelligent conversation. So I said to him, "Did you ever drink a pint of Guinness?" He said, "No." So I said, "I'll have to buy you one. You can't come to Ireland without drinking a pint of Guinness." So after he had 2 pints of Guinness, he told me a story. He was a policeman in Kiev, and he was about 31 years of age. And his father had been a policeman before him. And he said he came to work one day and he was told that the officers in his station were stood down and the Azov battalion were taken over. And then he thought, I'm not going working with them. So he made an excuse to go and see his mother, who was living near the Polish border. And he was saying she was sick and he had to go and see her. And when he got there, he came over the Polish border and he came to Ireland. Now, he told me he couldn't have that conversation with the people in the hostel. He had to keep quiet about who he was and what he was, because if the word got back, his mother and his immediate family would be in danger. So that's the sort of thing. That's what happens in civil wars.
And I spoke to you before organising the demonstration, or before the demonstration occurred at the British Embassy, and you had some concerns about security and the safety of people at the demonstration itself. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Yeah, this was our second demonstration. We had one earlier on the year, I think it was in August, at the GPO, and we were attacked by certain elements within the refugee community. But the guards were there, and the guards were very good on this occasion, and they broke it up very quickly, and we were able to make our points, you know. But we wanted to avoid any clashes, and we know that there is elements within the community that are fascists, within the refugee community that are fascists, probably a very small minority, but they're militant. And we know of one particular case in County Cavan where they were staying in a hotel, and they went back, and some of them actually died in combat, fighting for the Nazis. The more truth that comes out of Ukraine is the more that we can clarify that they are Nazis. And I think that the state here know they are as well, because if they come into the state with tattoos that support Nazism, they tend to be put in one hotel altogether. So I think whoever monitors them at the airports is pretty much aware of what's going on. And they keep them in the one place so they keep an eye on them. That's going on, and no one knows nothing about it, but it is going on. When you mix with the refugees as much as we do, you get a picture what's on the ground, and that's what's on the ground.
Okay. If people wanted to find out more about the Truth and Neutrality Alliance, maybe get involved, how would they go about that?
Well, we have a Facebook page, Truth and Neutrality Alliance, and we're building up a membership, and we do it through that. And we tell people what we're doing. We're having another demonstration next Saturday in Dublin, and they can find details out on that. During the week, the details will be put up, and they can follow us on the page.
Okay.
There's a lot of the Russian community and the Ukrainian community are coming to us, and we're looking for peace. We're looking for truth. That's all we're looking for. We're not taking. Well, people say we're taking sides. So suppose in the way we are, we're taking sides of truth as far as we're concerned, because the truth is just not out there. Now, Ireland has always been a neutral country, and it should be looking for peace, and it should be looking for truth. Like, we lost friends by being staying neutral during the Second World War. We lost friends, especially in America. And afterwards, people admired us for the individual stand that we took. And everything was done. They behaved like a neutral country, even giving condolences when Hitler was dead, and people laugh at that. Well, it's all very well laughing at that. But the thing is, if you're going to be neutral, you have to be seen to be neutral. And if we are a neutral country, we have to be seen to be neutral.
And how can a peace be made? And how can the world be informed of a peace if there's no acknowledgement of the other side, or there's no acknowledgement that there are at least two sides to the story? How can a peace be made?
It can't be made. But the thing is, the ice is breaking, and you can see it's breaking. Even yesterday, there was a big demonstration in Paris against the war. There's demonstrations all over Europe against the war. There's a movement building up against the war. Now, an awful lot of these anti-war people in Ireland, they have living on their laurels. Like, there was 120,000 people demonstrating in Dublin against the war that was going to take place in Iraq. And they're living on their laurels. But the thing is, that they are actually siding with NATO now. And that's something that we just have to say now. We can't side with NATO and we can't side with Putin, but we want to know the truth, and we want peace, and we want the escalation of the war to stop. It's getting to the stage now that they're recruiting 16-year-olds into their army. Now that means they're on their last legs. So where's the rest of the manpower going to come to fight this war for Zelensky? Unless he gets troops on the ground from other NATO countries, the war is over. And if he gets troops on the ground from other NATO countries, then we're into a third world war. And that's the seriousness of the whole situation. A third world war could break out very, very quick. And what's it all about? It's about him. You know, the world has never been in such serious danger in my lifetime. I lived even through the Cuban crisis. I was old enough. I think I was 12 or 13 when that was on. And that was a dreadful time. You know, the 12 days that shook the world when we all thought we were going to get blown up in one thing or another. But no, there's going to be peace made. I think that in the end, the Russians have an interest in getting the hold of the Ukraine. They're interested in supporting the Russian language speaking areas of Ukraine. And unless there's an agreement made that's going to be honoured, like the Minsk agreement, the war will continue, and it'll, in the end, the Russians have more resources, and in the war of attrition, they're going to win. Now, do people want that? The best way is now to sit down and start talking peace. And we should be encouraging peace, not encouraging NATO, because the government, the two parties that's in government, the three of them that's in government now in Ireland, would have us in NATO on the moon if they thought the people would agree to it. And the people might agree to it if they don't know the whole story. So that's why it's so important to get the truth out.
Bill O'Brien from the Truth and Neutrality Alliance. Check out the Facebook page of that organisation. There's a demonstration in Dublin next Saturday. The details are on that page. We'll be in contact again, Bill. We'll probably be at that demonstration and we'll do a report from it on Saturday as well. But for now, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.